Welcome back to our deep dive of A Court of Wings and Ruin. We are officially in the endgame now, and the stress levels are off the charts. We're covering chapters 57 through 65 in this episode, and if you are reading along with us, you already know that this block of chapters is an absolute roller coaster. We've got shifting alliances, looming battles, and a heart-stopping rescue mission, and honestly, we just need to scream about it all for the next hour. So grab your drink, settle in, and in honor of our beloved Suriel, let's spill the tea.
Okay, so we ended last episode getting to see two different battles that our Night Court gang was a part of. This most recent battle was turning a little bit bad because some of the lines were failing and Cassian was attempting to hold them on his own, and no one is able to get to him fast enough to be able to assist. So we're going to see what happens after that. Feyre has also realized that they don't know where Hybern's main part of the army is, and that Hybern has them kind of jumping all over the continent to fight little battles, and it's not a good solution for them because it just keeps them drained of their magic. And she's decided that the only way they're going to come up with a solution is if she finds the Suriel and gets answers directly from the Suriel to figure out what they need to do next or where the army is. So we start this chapter with Feyre and Mor having a little bit of an argument because, like I said, they have all seen that Cassian is attempting to hold the lines by himself. So Feyre is trying to get Mor to go down there to help them, saying that they need you. They need you to push back the front lines. Mor's response is, Rhys will kill me if I leave you here. And Feyre's response is, no, he's not. He's not going to do anything. He's got wards around the camp, and I'm not defenseless. Go because they really need you. And it isn't until Nesda actually turns to their discussion and tells Mor help them, because it was Cassian again who was making another charge towards a Hybern commander, hoping to spook the soldiers again. And Mor realizes that something needs to happen. Someone needs to go help him because he's not going to be able to do the same thing that he did in the last battle. So she does agree that she will leave them. She tells both Nesda and Feyre to be on their guard and to protect each other. And then she winnows to Azriel's side, which I don't get because Cassian's the one who needs help. So why doesn't she just winnow to Cassian's side? But no, she winnows to Azriel's side. Granted, it is because a soldier is about to hit him and actually do damage to him. And so Mor is able to kill the soldier before he's able to land the strike on Azriel. So I guess maybe she had to go to Azriel. I don't know. But then both she and Azriel push to get through as many soldiers as they can so that they can get to Cassian and help Cassian hold the lines. At this point, it is raining, like pouring down rain. Nesda is still standing at the top of the hill just watching Cassian fight. Feyre tells her that she will be back soon, but there's something that she needs to go do. Before Feyre even finishes speaking, Nesda has already turned back to the battle, resuming her unending vigil of the general battling on the valley floor below, which I love the way she worded that. But she is going to go track the Suriel, but Feyre does not have the time or any of the things that she needs to actually be able to snare the Suriel the way she's done in the past. So she actually takes a map and goes right into Elaine's tent and has Elaine do this. So she says, I need you to find something for me. She lays the map directly onto Elaine's map because Elaine is sitting in bed. She thinks maybe I could have been a little bit more gentle in saying this, but time is not on their side. And so she needs to do this immediately. She tells Elaine that it's called the Suriel. It's only one of many because we don't know the name of this particular Suriel. Suriel is like the group, the race of this monster. And then she goes to show Elaine what this particular Suriel looks like, pauses to ask if Elaine's okay with that. And she essentially says, I'm going to plant the image into your mind. Are you okay with that? Elaine says yes. And so she goes into Elaine's mind, mentions that the gates of her mind were solid iron covered in vines of flowers, or they would have been, but the blossoms were currently sealed, sleeping buds tucked into tangles of leaves and thorns. So it's like they are asleep in her mind. She's shut them down. So she plants the image of the Suriel into Elaine's mind, but tries to kind of infuse it with safety that, yes, it looked terrifying, but it would not harm Feyre because it had not harmed her in the past. So Feyre says, I need it. I need answers from it immediately. That's why I need you to find it. So Elaine does. She closes her eyes and mentions that it moves through the world like the breath of the western wind. Feyre wants to know where it's headed. And Elaine points to the middle of the continent. That the Suriel was headed for the ancient forest just miles away from the Weaver of the Wood. So Feyre does winnow up there because she's going to try and meet with the Suriel near the Weaver's house. She mentions that there was silence everywhere, and then she wonders. It's not until she gets there and realizes that her magic is almost gone. So she's trying to rely on what little is left, and she's realizing she is in the woods at night where there are lots of other scary monsters and scary beings that would love to tear her apart. And then she's realizing, well, maybe I should have brought more with me. Maybe that would have been a good idea. But at that point, the Suriel does come up behind her, asks if she's come there to kill the Suriel or beg for help once again. It says, "Thrice now we have met, thrice now you've hunted for me. This time you sent the trembling fawn to find me," as in Elaine. "I did not expect to see those doe eyes peering at me from across the world." So I think it's interesting that the Suriel could see Elaine looking for it. Feyre says, "I'm sorry if that was a violation, but this is an urgent matter." And the Suriel says, "Yes, you wish to know where Hybern is hiding its army." And Feyre says, "Yes, that and other things." So let's start with that, because Feyre always has lots of questions, not just for the Suriel, but in general. So the Suriel does tell her, even I cannot see it, that he uses magic to cloak it, magic far older than the Suriel. And Feyre says the cauldron, and the Suriel says, "Yes, that mighty wicked thing, that bowl of death and life. You have one already who can find Hybern." And Feyre says Elaine says she cannot see it past his magic, and the Suriel says then use the other one to track it. So she's talking about Nesda. Suriel says like calls to like. The king of Hybern does not travel without the cauldron, so where it is, he and his army shall be as well. Tell the beautiful thief to find it. So I love that she's calling Nesda a thief because she stole something from the cauldron, and that like everybody just knows. All of the ancient beings in this world just know that Nesda stole something from the cauldron. Feyre does find out that the Suriel means for Nesda to scry, to use bones and stones to be able to find it. And I love how we have it mentioned that the robes on the Suriel flitter on a phantom wind, because we're going to get that phrase a couple of times in this chapter. Feyre asks why the cauldron did not react when I joined the book and spoke the spell to nullify its power. And the Suriel says, "Because you did not hold on long enough." And Feyre says, "Well, it was killing me." And the Suriel says, "Did you think you could leash its power without a cost?" Because throughout all of Throne of Glass, one of the big things that Aelin hears is that there is a cost for everything, that she is the cost for multiple things, but that with magic, there is always a cost. I don't feel like we get it as harped on throughout ACOWAR as we do in Throne of Glass, but it is a very similar theme through both series, that there is a cost when large amounts of magic are involved. So Feyre says, "So then I need to die for us to stop the cauldron." And the Suriel's like, "Oh, you're so dramatic, human heart." But yes, that spell would have drained the life from you. Feyre said, "Is there a different spell that we can use to nullify the powers?" And she says, "If there were a such thing, you would still have to get close enough to the cauldron to use it. Hybern will not make that same mistake again." Feyre then asks if the bone carver would make a difference in the war. And the Suriel says, essentially, "I don't know. I cannot see him, not him. He's not born of this earth. His thread has not been woven in," which I think is really interesting, the way the Suriel words that his thread has not been woven in, like it hasn't been woven into this world. So the Suriel can't see it because the Suriel is apparently only of this world. They can only see what is in this world. Feyre does ask about the mirror, the Ouroboros mirror that the carver wants. The Suriel calls it the mirror of beginnings and endings. And Feyre says, "Yes, I cannot retrieve it." The Suriel says it's because you're afraid to look at what's within. And Feyre says, "Well, will it drive me mad? Will it break me?" And the Suriel says, "Only you can decide what breaks you." which is one of my favorite lines in the book. And then the Suriel again listened to that phantom wind and says, "Tell the silver-eyed messenger that the answer lies on the second and penultimate pages of the book. Together they hold the key." Feyre asks, "To what?" They hold the key to what? And the Suriel starts to say the answer to what you need to stop Hybern, but the Suriel is cut off because all of a sudden there is an arrow protruding from the Suriel's throat. The Suriel falls to its knees, letting out a scream at the impact, birds scattering all around, and then Feyre can hear a female voice that she recognizes, wondering why the Suriel will talk to Feyre when it wouldn't even deign to speak to me. And Ianthe, with 2 Hybern soldiers, comes out of the trees. So, just another reason why we hate Ianthe. They end up shooting additional ash arrows into the Suriel to keep it down. Ianthe says to Feyre, "I had heard from Tamlin how you captured this one, so I adapted your methods. But it would not tell me anything. But since you have made contact so many times, the robe I gave it had a simple tracking spell, a gift from the king, to be triggered in your presence only, if you should come calling again." Ianthe has charmed the robe that she gave the Suriel to essentially turn on a locating spell whenever Feyre was in the Suriel's presence. So as soon as the Suriel comes to Feyre, it is activated and Ianthe can come and find them. So the Suriel is attempting to mouth run to Feyre so that Feyre can live, even if it means the Suriel will die. Ianthe does talk about how the king built shields in her mind to keep Feyre from harming her again, but that she still hasn't gained all of the movement in her hand because of the damage that Feyre had her do to her own hand. Feyre's response is, "I should have slit your throat that night in the tent." And Ianthe's response is, "You'll find you want to reconsider how you speak to me because I'll be your best advocate when we get back to Hybern." And Feyre says, "Well, I suppose you'll have to catch me first." And then she turns to run. And her plan is to run to the Weaver, and hopefully the Weaver will take down Ianthe and the Hybern soldiers for her. She starts running through the woods, and I love this description, the sense that Feyre gets as she's running through the woods, because she mentions, "I could have sworn that ancient forest moved to make room for me. I could have sworn it too read my final thoughts to the Suriel and cleared the way for me, but not for them," because she mentions that as Feyre is running through, leaping over the rocks and streams, sprinting around the trees, that the guards and Ianthe behind seem to get caught up by them. And so she makes it to where the Weaver is. The cottage door is open, and Feyre mentions, "Perhaps she was waiting for me. Perhaps she had ordered the woods to open a path." So Feyre does run right into the Weaver's cottage. She does say, "Help me," before she gets in, because she's putting on an act, trying to get Ianthe to think that Feyre's going into this cottage for help. So Ianthe gets to the door and says, "Well, whoever is in there, we're going to have to kill them as well." So that's very selfish of you, Feyre, for you to bring in an innocent into this. Feyre comes in, grabs the handle, and kind of goes behind the door to hold the door open, because we know in the past that the door is going to slam shut, and it immediately starts to try to do that. Whatever magic the Weaver has in the house, the door tries to slam shut. Feyre's trying really hard to keep it open, waiting for Ianthe and the soldiers to come in. The Weaver gets up, and Feyre can hear her kind of behind her. I think it's interesting because the Weaver says, "You have seen my twin. I smell him on you." And we got from the carver that this was his sister. We did not get from the carver that this was his twin, which I don't know if that makes a difference or not, but I think it's interesting that he didn't mention it, but she does. The Weaver does ask what Feyre is. Feyre doesn't respond. And then the Weaver goes so far as to say, "Who did you bring, little wolf? Who did you bring to me?" Which I think is really interesting, because in book 2, when Feyre went into the Weaver's cottage, she was talking herself up, saying, "I am a wolf. I will go in and I'll come back out again." And then while she's in the Weaver's cottage, she thinks to herself, "Well, whether I'm a wolf or something else, like a mouse or something, it doesn't matter because I am still cornered by the Weaver." And I love that the Weaver now is calling her a little wolf, because I feel like it just foreshadows back into that a little bit, ties it back into that. But then Ianthe and her 2 guards step over the threshold. Feyre's response to the Weaver then is, "I brought you dinner." She swings around the door, makes it out, and lets the door slam behind her. And then she makes it into the woods right as the screaming begins. Now that Ianthe and the Hybern soldiers are gone, she can go back to the Suriel. Her initial thought is, I'm going to save it with my magic. But the Suriel says that your magic is spent. Do not waste what little you have left on saving me. So Vera says, then what can I do? And the Suriel says, stay until the end, which is something that we saw Feyre talk about through the first book, that when the fairy died after its wing had been cut off and Tamlin had brought it in, Feyre's only response was, I'm going to stay with it until it passes. It's at the end of the first book, when she was dying, that was the only thing she wanted, was for someone to be there with her. And so she is again going to be there with the Suriel. The Suriel does tell us at this point that it did know that there was a tracking spell on the cloak, and it came anyway. And Feyre asks why it came, and the Suriel said, because you were kind, you fought your fear, you were kind to me. Feyre says, thank you for helping me when no one else would. And the Suriel says, I told you to stay with the High Lord, and you did. Feyre says, yes, you meant Rhys. I did. I stayed with him, and everything was righted with Amarantha. And the Suriel says, no, stay with him and live to see everything righted. Not yet, but continue to stay with him. So there's something else that she needs to do to stay with Rhysand to be able to see everything else righted in this world. The Suriel tries to tell her to leave at one point because the blood leaking out of it is going to draw other monsters. Feyre says that she'll stay a little bit longer. So the Suriel has a request, and Feyre, of course, responds with anything. And the Suriel says, leave this world a better place than how you found it. And this is when Feyre realizes that it was not just for kindness, but because this Suriel was a dreamer, just like everyone in the Court of Dreams. And this part always makes me cry. Because it's just like, it's a whole other race of monster or of people in this world that has probably been in a very similar situation as everybody in the Night Court, the inner circle, has been in, where they were dreaming of a better world and not knowing how to attain it or not having the power to obtain it. So the Suriel was helping Feyre because Feyre is able to obtain it. Feyre is in a place of power where she can influence the world. And Feyre says it was the heart of a dreamer that had ceased beating inside that monstrous chest, because the Suriel does die. Helion actually steps in, touches Feyre's shoulder. At this point, he has found her in the woods, says that it's not safe, we have to go. And Helion does end up using the power of the sun to burn the Suriel after Feyre puts his cloak on top of the Suriel to replace the enchanted cloak of Ianthe's. Right before they went back to the war camp, Feyre says, I could have sworn that the pile of ashes was stirred by a phantom wind. So that's like our third or fourth time a phantom wind is used in this chapter, especially in regards to the Suriel. So then Helion winnows her right back to Rhys's war tent. Rhys, of course, is very happy to see her because he didn't know where she was. Of course, Feyre starts crying as soon as he hugs her because of everything that happened with the Suriel. She feels so bad that the Suriel died because it was giving her answers. But once she's done crying, then he actually tells her that Cassian is not well. That Cassian did fight to regain and hold the lines, and that he was hurt pretty badly because of that. Mor and Azriel were able to get to him before he was killed, but he was injured pretty badly before they were able to get there. And I love how she steps into Cassian's tent, sees Mor and Azriel sitting on the cot, monitoring the healer, because she says, I understood then the quiet Cassian had once mentioned to me, like the quiet in your head when someone you care about does something or is hurt. But I find this interesting. The healer is healing Cassian's stomach because he has essentially been cut, like, straight up his torso, to the point where his guts are spilling out. We find out Azriel had to hold them in. But what's interesting is she talks about the healer as the healer held her glowing hands over Cassian, hands flaring with white light. Where else do we see healers with white light as their healing power? in Tower of Dawn when we meet the healers in the Torre Chesme and Irene, because that is what her healing power looks like. So it makes me wonder, are they connected? Craziness. Okay. Farah finds out that they did win this battle. And again, Tarquin had been given the decision what happened with the survivors, but that Cassian had been gravely injured. Mor is upset with her because Mor thought that she was leaving Farah on the mountain with Nesta, and then as soon as Mor left, Farah left to find the Suriel. And when they were done with the battle, Rhys didn't know where she was because she didn't leave a note. He had made it to Elaine's tent trying to track her down when Helion sent word to him that he had found Farah and was using whatever gift that he allowed him to sense such things that he was bringing her back. The healer says that Cassian will be fine. He'll be sore for a few days, but he will be okay. That's when Mor says that he wouldn't wait for them. He kept charging the Hybern line and the commanders engaged him. And again, Mor asks Farah, where did you go? The healer says if you're going to fight, you need to take it outside because Cassian doesn't need to hear it. Rhys tries to kind of reword what Mor is saying in a nicer, less demanding way. And he says, you are as always free to go wherever and whenever you wish. But what I think Mor is saying is try to leave a note next time so that they know where Farah has gone. They know that if she might need help, that's where she is, that kind of thing. And she notices that there was panic in his eyes, not the controlling fear that Tamlin dealt with, but this was a genuine terror because he didn't know where she was. He couldn't get to her if she had needed help because she didn't tell him where she was going. Farah starts to say, I'm sorry, and Rhys says, you don't have anything to be sorry for. You decided to take things into your own hands and got us valuable pieces of information, but...
Wait, sorry. If he didn't know where she was, how did Helion find her?
She mentioned Rhys had been looking for her, kind of following her path, I'm assuming by scent, where she went in the camp before she actually left. So she goes to Elaine's tent first. And so he mentioned he'd only known I was gone after the battle stopped when he realized Mor had been fighting and that I was not at the camp anymore. He'd just reached Elaine's tent when Helion sent word he'd found me. And then the next sentence is, using whatever gift he possessed that allowed him to sense such thing. So I'm assuming that means whatever gift Helion had to be able to sense where people were. Because Helion found the Lady of Autumn when no one knew where she was. So I'm assuming it's just part of his power that he either just knows or there's something in him that can sense. Or at least that's what I gather from that sentence. Using whatever gift he possessed that allowed him to sense such things. But Rhys says, we have been lucky keeping a step ahead of Hybern. Even today wasn't as fortunate on the battlefield as the last one, but the cynic in me wonders if our luck is about to expire, and I would rather it not end with you. So he's saying that they've been lucky so far in this battle. Yes, they've had a lot of bad things that have happened, but overall, everyone is still alive. But he's concerned that they're going to run out of the luck that he feels they currently have, and he doesn't want that to run out when she's not there, when they're not there to be able to support her. And Farah and Rhys have a conversation mind to mind. She asks, would you have let me go if you knew? And he says, I don't let you do anything. We are partners. You're your own person. You make your own decision. But we are mates. I am yours and you are mine. We do not let each other do things. We don't dictate the movements of each other. But I might have insisted I go with you more for my own mental well-being, just to know that you are safe. And she says, well, you were occupied. And he says, well, I would have unoccupied myself if I needed to. And then he says out loud, I wonder if the Weaver forgives you now because she led Ianthe into the Weaver to steal all of her youth and beauty. And Farah's response is, I don't want to know. Cassian finally does wake up, and I love the healer's snark to him after he wakes up. Because she's like, that's what you get for stepping in front of a sword. They're all on a battlefield in front of swords. He didn't do it on purpose, but she's given him a little bit of crap for it. He asks how bad it was. Cassian's asking about the battle, not himself, because that's what he cares about. Rhys said that Kier took heavy hit, but that they won barely. And Rhys responds and says, in regards to you and your person, don't ever do that kind of crap again. Cassian says, well, I needed to. I had to disobey your order. And Rhys says, your guts were literally hanging out. Az had to hold them in for you. Like, that's how badly injured he was. Cassian says, I'm a soldier. It's part of my job. Rhys says, I gave you an order to hold back, to wait, and you ignored it. Cassian says, the line was breaking. Your order was bull. It was a load of BS. Henry says, I am your high lord. You don't get to disregard orders you don't like. Which I get, but at the same time, Cassian has a very fair point when he says, you don't get to pull rank because you're mad. And Rhys says, I'm not pissed. I'm furious because your theatrics on the battlefield almost got you killed. And Cassian says, so you're allowed to be mad at my choices to protect you, but we're not allowed to be mad at you for your self-sacrificing BS. And all Rhys can say is you could have died, and Cassian's response is, so could you. So they've come to a point where Cassian is doing the same kind of things that Rhys has done because Cassian doesn't want Rhys to have to do it, and vice versa. At that point, Feyre, as Suriel, and Mor leave so that Cassian and Rhys get a chance to air out their grievances. So they step out of the tent. Feyre finds Nesda immediately because she is essentially right outside the tent. She doesn't even wait for Nesda to say anything. She just says he's fine, healed, and awake. And Nesda's shoulders sagged a little bit. And then Mor, being the bee that she's decided to be at this point, pretty much, says, shouldn't you be refilling that bucket in regards to the bucket that Nesda has because she's helping with the injured? So then Mor turns on Feyre because she's upset that Feyre didn't tell her where she was going. Mor claims she lied to her, and Feyre says, well, I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you what I planned to do. And Feyre says, I'm sorry. And Mor's just like, yeah, you're sorry. I know every excuse that you're about to say, every excuse for why I couldn't go with you. But none of it excuses you from lying to me. If you'd explained, I would have let you go. If you had trusted me, I would have let you go, or maybe talked you out of an idiotic idea that nearly got you killed. And then she talks about if Hybern had found her, that Feyre doesn't understand the lengths that Hybern will go to find her and how much they would delight in breaking her, not killing her, but breaking her to their will. And Feyre says, well, we needed this information. And Mor says, of course we did. But do you know what it felt like to look Rhys in the eye and tell him I had no idea where you were? Which I feel like is the worst part of what happened. That's why Mor is really upset, because she didn't have an answer for Rhys, and Rhys is her high lord. And Feyre says, I'm not going to listen to this. If Rhys isn't yelling at me, then you shouldn't either. And Mor says, oh, Rhys might be all smiles and forgiveness, but you still have to answer to us. You are our high lady. Do you not understand what that means when you imply you don't trust us to help you? Then Feyre kind of makes a mistake, but not really, and says, how about the fact that you lie to yourself and all of us every single day? And Mor just says, you don't know what you're talking about. So Feyre brings Helion up and says, clearly you found no enjoyment or you got no pleasure in going to bed with him. So why haven't you ever made a move on Azriel? So before you excuse me of being a liar, I suggest you look long and hard at yourself. Mor says that's enough. Then she tells Feyre to get out. Feyre leaves Mor's tent, runs into Amren, because Amren has been told that they have an idea of where in the book they can find their next spell. So Amren says, every time you lot leave me at home, someone manages to get gutted. Which cracks me up, because leave it to Amren to throw in a little bit of sarcastic fun in a heated moment. But she does warn Feyre and say, be careful, there are some truths that even Morrigan has not herself faced. Which I'm just like, Morrigan is supposed to be truth. Like, that's what her power is based out of. So why has she not come to terms with some of this stuff when she's over 500 years old? I don't get it. But Amren does tell her that they all fight from time to time. Both of them just need to cool off a little bit and then talk to Mark. So they all go into the war tent to have a discussion about the information that Feyre discovered, and because they're going to have Nesda attempt to scry and find the army itself. I think it's interesting because Feyre does, as they're all kind of gathering around the table, she does think about Nesda as Nesda comes in, thinks about how long Nesda stood atop that hill watching the battle, if she had seen Cassian fall. And I almost want to say most definitely. There's no way that she would have stopped looking, especially when he was in such a precarious position and he was continually going after different soldiers. So yeah, she most definitely stayed up there the entire time and saw him go down. So they have brought Nesta in so that she can try and scry to figure out where the cauldron is and therefore where Hybern's army is. I love that Feyre mentioned while looking at Nesta that there were arcs of mud lay beneath Nesta's nails. And we get in the very first book Nesta calling Feyre an animal or a beast no better than the peasants because of how dirty she was, because the dirt under her nails, that kind of thing. So I think it's interesting that Nesta is now as dirty as Feyre would have been in book 1. And we get more ties to the witches from Throne of Glass. Because the scrying stones and bones that they use are you have 3 stones for the faces of the mother. How is that not the same? How? And then 4 bones, Amren says for whatever reason, I can't be bothered to remember. Bullcrap! There is no way that Amren doesn't remember what the bones stand for. And I just want to know, what does she know that we don't? What part of that would link us to something else that Amren doesn't mention? And therefore that we don't. I honestly think that's what it is. Anyway, Amren tells her she can't just think about the cauldron, that she must cast her mind toward it and find the bond that links them. Amren closes her eyes, the bones and stones in her hand, the map below her. Cassian at her side, because at this point he has gotten up from the chair they put him in, hobbled over to her and has a hand on her back, is at her side so that he can not be to protect her, but just be there as a source of comfort. Nesta can't find it initially, so Amren tells her to go deeper, find the tether between you. And then they find out that Nesta has actually gone too far. Amren pushes her possibly a little too far, and she gets to a point where Nesta can't open her hand because she's frozen. She's frozen based on what she sees. So Feyre lunges into her mind, and she mentions that if Elaine's mental gates were those of a sleeping garden, Nesta's belonged to an ancient fortress, sharp and brutal. The sort I imagine they once impaled people upon. Which, if you think about it, the king in Throne of Glass actually did impale bodies on his castle walls, which were in iron gates. The castle itself was stone and glass, but the gate around it was actually made of iron, in case we missed that part. So Feyre goes into her mind and notices that the gates to her mind have been thrown completely open and that Nesta is inside. Feyre mentioned that it was dark like I'd never known, even with Rhysand. So it's a different kind of darkness. And in book 2, we get Rhysand discussing the different kinds of darkness with us. Now we have a completely different darkness. So this is like the cauldron level darkness. Nesta has essentially frozen because she has seen the army that is stretched into the horizon, the weapons, the hate, the sheer size of it, and that she's frozen in place because she is in a war tent, the king in there, but it's not the king Nessa's looking at, it is the cauldron. That Nessa is frozen in place with undiluted fear, seeing the cauldron, which makes sense, because if she can't go into a bathtub, then seeing the cauldron again must be traumatic for her. Feyre tells her, you found it, now we can leave. It's okay. Open your hand. Once you open your hand, then we'll be able to go back. And Nesta nods and they both turn to leave, but the cauldron, as if some great sleeping beast opened an eye, seemed to sense us watching. They can feel the cauldron and a monstrous force kind of swell behind them as a black wave rising up. And Feyre yells at her to open her fist now so that they can get out of it. So finally, Nesta is able to open it. Feyre jumps out of her mind. They end up being able to come, and then they all look down at the map, and the stones and bones have made a perfect circle around one spot, showing where the king had amassed its army. And it is along the western edge of the human territory, perhaps no more than 100 miles from our family's estate. So the king of Hybern has had them going all over Prythian and the Fae court, while he has landed on the western edge of the human And Feyre mentions we had won the high ground in these two battles, but Hybern had won the high ground in the war. So they call everybody into the war tent to discuss what their next steps are going to be. They can't wait for Jurian somehow give them additional information on what the king plans to do next. So they have to take action and figure out what they're going to. They decide that they're going to rest on it and they're going to meet again at dawn to figure out what is best to do because no one can come up with a good option. At this point, Varian walks in and sees Amren and she just smiles so big. Like, I just love it. And he walks over to her and just kisses her and picks her up and she just wraps herself around him and they leave the tent. Like, amongst all of these people, primarily men who are having this war council, like 4 or 5 different high lords, and he just walks in, makes out with her, and walks out.
As it should.
Right? It cracks me up. And I love it that when they walk past Feyre's response is that they were letting out noises that were unnervingly like purring as they vanished into the... Oh my god. And then I love it. Rhys and Tarquin's response is Rhys just laughs a little bit, and as everyone is gawking, they're leaving. And Rhys says, I suppose that's how Varian decided he'd tell Amrit. He was feeling rather grateful she ordered us to go to Adriana. And Tarquin's response is to cringe and say, we'll alternate who has to deal with them on holiday. Oh my gosh, it cracks me. Feyre and Rhys go off to bed. Everybody disperses because they're going to sleep on it and meet again in the morning to figure out what they want. Feyre is trying to think through maybe there is something else that they're not seeing, some additional shot at salvation that they could come up with. But she does fall asleep and she ends up dreaming first of the Suriel, of it bleeding out while smiling, of the Weaver's open mouth as it ripped into Ianthe while she screamed, and then she dreams of Lord Grayson, so mortal and young, standing at the edge of the camp, beckoning to Elaine, telling her he'd come for her, to come with him, that he'd found a way to undo what had been done to her, to make her human again. That she dreamed of the cauldron in the King of Hybern's war tent, so dark and slumbering, awakening as Nesda and I stood there, invisible and unseen. How it had watched back, know not. I could feel it watching me even then in my dreams. Feel it extend an ancient black tendril towards me. And then Feyre jolts awake because she realizes something is wrong. So she scans the dark, listening. She makes Rhys wake up, and her response is the exact same that Nesda had before the wall went down. She says, something is here, something is wrong. She tells Rhys that she dreamed of the cauldron and that it was watching, and that she thinks they opened a door. They step out of their tent. Nesta is already there and says, you can hear it too. And Feyre says, well, I can't hear anything, but I can feel something. Amren then comes out of her tent with Varian. She is only in his shirt. He is only in pants, just like Rhys is only in pants. Amren says, it came here, its power, I can feel it slithering around looking. Amren says that it knows where we are just as much as we know where it is. Rhys can't hear it. Amren says, well, you were not made, only those who are made. So Amren, Feyre, and Nesta are able to hear or feel it, and they're trying to figure out what it wants. And then Azriel steps out of the shadows and is like, what is that? And Feyre's like, well, you can hear it. And he says, no, but the shadows, the wind, they recoil from, as if the cauldron was singing, distant, but withdrawing. And Feyre thinks it's leaving. The cauldron sang one final note and then went silent. In the present, the weight of it vanished. Then Varian turns to them and says, so you three, because you were made, you can hear it and sense it. Amren says it would appear so. And then Azriel asks, what about Elaine? And then both Nesda and Feyre break out into a run. As Feyre says, something cold went through, and they step into Elaine's tent, and Elaine is gone. Azriel stalks in too, touches her blankets. They're still warm, so it was very recently that she was. That's when Feyre mentions the cauldron and it was fading away, going somewhere, luring Elaine away, and Feyre knows exactly how it happened because she had dreamt of it. That the cauldron presented itself as Grayson to lure Elaine out of the camp. So they make it to the edge of the camp, which is where Rhys is because he has found her cloak, also still warm from her body. So then they are trying to figure out what to do next because Elaine has now been taken by Hybern to Hybern. Feyre thinks Nesda had stolen something vital from the cauldron, and in those moments, Nesda had hunted it down for us. The cauldron had learned what was vital to her, so the cauldron had stolen something in return. Cassian says, "We'll get her back. Don't worry, we'll get her back." Nesda says, "No, we won't. I saw that army, its size, who is in it. There is no chance of any of you getting into its heart. Not even you. Especially not while you're injured." And then Azriel comes in and says, "I'm getting her back." And Nesda's response is, "Then you're going to die." And he says, "That's fine. I'm going to get her." Feyre decides she is going with him. Azriel at this point only nods because he's okay with it. They'll figure out what they need to do, but they will get her back. Feyre says, "Then I'm going to walk right in," when Cassian tries to tell her that she'll never make it into the camp. And then Feyre shifts herself but in actual change, full shape-shifting into Ianthe. She turns to Azriel and says, "I need one of your siphons." And then she goes to the blacksmith because she is going to have the blacksmith craft a crown for her, like what Ianthe had worn. And she's going to use one of Azriel's blue siphons as the jewel. It's not a perfect match to the jewel, but since it's nighttime, she's hoping no one will notice the difference. Rhys can't go because they know that the King of Hybern will be able to sense his powers. He says you can't winnow in because there are wards around the camp. You need to walk in and you'll need to walk out before you can make the jump back. And I love this part because it's one of my favorite questions, because Rhys is discussing with, he's not trying to stop her from going in. He's not telling her he has to go to protect. He is preparing her for what's to come, kind of building her up, riling her up a little bit so that she stays focused. He says, "Do not get distracted. Ianthe sold out your sisters. Is only fitting that you use her face to get Elaine back." He says, "Do not get distracted. Do not linger. You are a warrior, and warriors know when to pick their fight. They took what is ours, and we do not allow those crimes to go unpunished." And then this is one of my favorite lines. "You do not fear. You do not falter. You do not yield. You go in, you get her, and you come out again." And then he says, "You are a wolf," which is our reoccurring theme here, "and you cannot be caged." Then he turns to Azriel and says very similar things. "You get in and you get out. I don't care how many of them you have to kill, but they both come out." As in Feyre and Elaine. And Azriel says, "I swear it, High Lord." Then Azriel winnows them to outside the Hybern camp. Feyre does mention that his dark breeze was different from Rhys's, colder and sharp, which I think is interesting that it's colder, and we might tie that back into a theory down the road. But she does mention that it is different from Rhysand's. I'm going to tie everything into theories if I can. So Nesda is able to give them specifics on where they need to land outside the Hybern camp. Azriel fades into Shadow's darkness, so he literally becomes Feyre's shadow, which I think is really neat that that's how they do it. She's walking in and he is literally blending into her shadow. And then she walks into the heart of the Hybern army. She mentions that the first test is going to come when they get to the first set of guards, whether or not they know that Ianthe is dead. She mentions that Azriel had gotten her some bracelets and a robe from the camp priestess, and Feyre mentions that she lets the bracelets jangle loudly around her wrist as if she's a cat with a bell on its collar. Because I feel like that's the perfect description of what Ianthe is. A pet. I suppose Ianthe was no more than a pet of the king, which is exactly what Feyre has never wanted to be, was someone's pet. And she felt like she was being pushed into that by the spring court. Okay, so they make it into the camp. Feyre is put on not only Ianthe's skin, but she's trying to emanate Ianthe completely. But she does hear screaming and is able to see, the king is celebrating. That's where most of the guards or the soldiers are. They're celebrating the cauldron brought Elaine to the king. But it's not Elaine who's hanging from a makeshift rack, that it is actually another human girl. But it is very similar to Claire, and Feyre kind of has a moment where she's struggling with it because it's so similar to Claire. But Jurian comes walking from between two tents to talk to them, which I feel like we are starting to like Jurian more and more because we see his good side more and more. So he does end up helping Feyre through this whole scene in the Hybern camp. So he does realize that it is not Ianthe, but it is Feyre in Ianthe's. They have a little bit of a banter back and forth because there are other guards around and they don't want them to know that anything is off. He says to her, remember, you've been lusting after me for the last couple of weeks now. Act like it. So she kind of tries to look like she's flirting with him a little bit, but it's not Rhysand, so she's struggling. Jurian's response is, I have trouble believing that's how you won his heart. Feyre's just like, where is she? Where is Elain? So Jurian does tell her that it gave the king a shock when Elain just appeared in front of the cauldron, that he had her contained and then came here to brood over what to do with her and how to make you pay for it. Elain is in the king's tent and she won't get to his tent without his assistance. So she agrees to let him help. He says, go tell somebody that you want to pray before the cauldron before you meet me in my tent so we can do our thing. Because they're pretending like they're actually going to go to bed. But I love it because he touches her back and he can feel the amount of weapons that she has. And his response is, well, it seems like you already have plenty of steel on you. No need for... Which cracks me up because I'm starting to like Jurian. And Feyre asks about the girl on the rack. Jurian says there have been many before her, there will be many after her. You need to choose either your sister or the girl. Feyre says, I need you to bring both. Of course. So Feyre goes into the tent, starts chanting a prayer that she has heard Ianthe say multiple times. While she's there, she mentions the darkness that devoured the light and that it was the cauldron. Jurian tells her, you have 5 minutes to get her out. Take her to the western edge. There's a cliff overlooking the river. I'll meet you there. If you hear screaming, don't panic, because he's most likely going to set up some sort of diversion. And then he smirks at the shadows and says, I hope you can carry 3, Shadow Singer. So he does know, however he can tell, he does know that the Shadow Singer is a...
I kind of wonder, with him being resurrected, I wonder if he was seeing more because now he's technically remade. So he's not quite Fae. He was put back in his own body, so to speak, but because he did go to the brink of non-existence and now he's human. No, he went from being fully resurrected. He didn't get the Fae like the girls did, but because of the spell, maybe because he was on the brink of death and brought back. Yeah. Given like just that extra intuition, not quite the seer sense Elaine has, but the instinct that Azriel has at a lower level, kind of.
And
I was thinking on that. Well, and it makes sense because when he was talking about when she killed the twins, and he's like, well, that's why I trusted you. And that was one thing that I was like, well, he was already sizing her up from that comment. You can tell he was sizing her up in the spring court. And so it made me wonder, did he decide to turn once he met her, or did he just realize he had alliances away from Hybern that he could push?
Oh, no, I don't think he was ever turned to Hybern at any point. I think it was he found her when he interacted with her in the spring court. He had a chance to determine what side she was on. And based on everything that he knew from the war, his relationships with Rhys and Mor and all of them, that he knew she was kind of spewing some BS when it came to hating on the Night Court. But I also think like he was aware throughout all of Amarantha. So he saw her do the trials. So I think it was more of a, do I want to trust you completely? Because I already know that you'll do anything for those that you care about kind of. And so, like I said, I think it was just, this was a, do I trust you completely? Are you actually wanting to fight for Prithian or not? Is what he had to decide in the spring court. Are you going to fight for the humans more since he's still human? So, no. But yeah, he most definitely could have been given extra gifts. It could just be his intuition. It could just be because he was like a commander or a general in the first war. So he has that knowledge. Maybe he learned from Rhys and Amarantha. And he just knew that there's no way Feyre would be able to come alone. She would need someone else. But because he can't see anybody else with her, maybe he just assumed it was Azriel. I don't know for sure. But we don't know. Maybe we'll get more of Jurian in future books. which I would not be opposed. So she goes into the tent and does find Elaine gagged, wrists wrapped in steel that glowed violet. So they are different from the shackles that he used on Rhysand. That it actually, there is a spell on it. It isn't just shackles to nullify her powers, which I think is really interesting. But I don't know how that ties into anything. They aren't able to get the shackles off of her at that point because they don't have the time to figure it out. So they are going to take her still shackled and then deal with it when they get back to their camp. And I think it's really interesting because Elaine is not like, she's not crying, or Feyre doesn't mention she's crying, just that she shook her head looking at Azriel, devouring the sight of him, saying, "You came for me." And that there were, like, she doesn't mention Elaine being upset at all, just that Azriel scoops her up and she loops her bound arms around his neck. He tells her to hold tight, don't make a sound. And Feyre mentions that her heart was thundering, but Elaine glanced between us, did not tremble, did not cringe. So, like, did Elaine see this, see what was going to happen, and knew that they were going to make it out okay? We don't know, but she is remarkably calm for someone who is currently shackled in their enemies. Azriel then makes all of them invisible. She calls it shadow bound. He said that the shadows won't last long because the sun is coming up. So there are going to be a lot less shadows around when the sun comes up, but also because he is quickly running out of. So they are trying to run through the camp to get to the western side. They do run past a rack of weapons, and so at that point, Feyre sheathes all the knives that she's been holding and actually grabs a bow and quiver. They're ash arrows. Some of the nearest hounds for the king scent that they are there and start chasing after. So they're trying to run as fast as possible to avoid the hounds and get past. The hounds can sense them even if they can't see them. That they were some cousin of the Naga, some monstrous scaled thing that thundered on all fours, serpentine face, snarling and full of bone-shredding white teeth. Yeah? You gonna put it there too, Emily?
Right? Yeah, okay. Because the hound was, because I've seen drawings of it in theory reels and all of that where it looks more hound-like. And you sent me one last night.
Yeah, the other.
And if you went through the comments of it, and I was thinking, no, that's not right because it's supposed to have serpentine features and it doesn't, or serpentine features, it doesn't. And I'm like, where is that? And then I was going through the comments, bored watching trash TV and what. And one of the comments said it too, isn't it supposed to be more of, and I'm thinking like the basilisk in Chamber of Secrets, because,
right.
That's where my mind goes a lot with fantasy stuff. And I'm like, so that with the cross of like hound body. And I was like, no, that would be Throne of Glass. Like, it ties it back into, it's the first book in my mind is where I was going with it.
Yeah, it's like the word hounds.
Yeah.
From Throne of Glass. So we've now compared, we have the word hound in Throne of Glass to these hounds, the King of Hybern's hounds. And we've also compared the adder to the flying ilkin that were shapeshifters in Throne of Glass. Very, very similar between the two different. I don't know that it matters, but serpentine is also a stone. So did Sarah write it as their faces were serpentine as in like a serpent? Or were they hard like the stone?
Interesting.
Yeah, because I was like, well, what would serpentine features look like? And that's immediately what pops up when you Google serpentine features is that it is not a single mineral, but a group of magnesium, iron, silicate minerals, known for its distinctive olive green color, patterned veining, and slippery feet. So maybe it looks
Make
like
a little bit more sense than,
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
So I don't know which description she's going for in this part, but just throwing it out there that it may not be snake-like. So it could be a lot closer to the word hounds in Throne of Glass than we're thinking. Feyre also mentions that she can sense something else running alongside that, to what she assumes that they are Hybern commanders trying to catch up to them, or at least get to wherever Feyre and Azriel are going to be, that they were tracking them by using the beast. So they get close to the western edge. There is a girl there wrapped up in a cloak. That's the girl who was on the spit that Jurian was able to get to there. Feyre says, "You take them. I'll make sure that I get out." She gives him an order, and then she actually has an arrow that impacts her shoulder. And it is an ash arrow. She turns around to see that it is the King of Hybern who has actually shot that arrow. And then the hounds were on her in the next second, that she is able to kill a couple of them with the bow, but one of them does break the bow in. And right as they leap for her, a deafening roar made her head ring, and it is a roar she recognizes. And then a golden furred beast with curling horns tore into the hounds, and it is Tamlin. Finally, we get a little bit of redemption from Tamlin. Good grief. Almost to the end of book 3, right? Yeah, exactly. She realizes that it is Tamlin in his beast form running alongside, and the king is absolutely surprised that Tamlin has come to Feyre's aid. Apparently, Tamlin has done a really good job of making it look like or seem like he is on Hybern's side when he is really on Prithian's. So Feyre is able to break away from the hounds since Tamlin has them occupied now. They are both. He is telling Feyre that you need to fly. That there were multiple more hounds closing in. Tamlin was still fighting the others, but more were. So Feyre brings out her wings and says, "I did not consider another alternative. I would get airborne." And that Tamlin, despite letting out a yelp of pain because of the hounds biting him, said that he did not falter, did not yield an inch to them in his protection of. And so she watches Azriel take off and is gobbling down details of it so that she could try and do it as well. Elaine is yelling at the human girl to grab onto Azriel as he's like half racing, half flying towards them. And finally, Elaine screams, "If you want to live, do it now." And so the girl opens her arms to be grabbed, and Elaine also grabs onto her to be able to keep the girl airborne. One of the hounds breaks free from trying to hurt Tamlin and chases after Azriel and does manage to rake its claws down Azriel's wings and then attach itself to his spine. Elaine is able to kick multiple times, finally hit the beast in the face, and it lets go. And then it does fall over the cliff down to it. But Azriel is able to remain airborne despite being shredded, that he is kind of patched up or put his magic over his wounds for the time being to at least stabilize his wings. Feyre continues to run. And I think it's interesting because he beheld what charged after me, the sprint ahead, and for the first time since I had known him, there was true terror in Azriel's eyes as he watched me make that run. She is trying to flap her wings in updraft that she has created herself, trying to catch and push herself up with her own wind. But she still lands, stumbles, tries to kick off again. Azriel is yelling at her to go faster, to push up. And she's realizing that if she can't get airborne, if she can't catch a wind, she will end up splattered on the bottom of the ravine, and even splattered that the king would keep whatever was left of her, similar to how Jurian was kept by Amaranth. Azriel tells her, hold her wings up high, legs up. She is beating them as much as she can. She's, like I said, sends a wind up underneath her to help her rise up. Still, she ends up slamming back to the ground. And she says, I knew that whatever force had compelled me to learn to fly, somehow I'd known this moment was coming. And she's barely 3 steps away from the edge of the cliff at this point. A warm wind, kissed with lilac and new grass, blasted up from beneath me, a wind of spring. lifting me up, filling my wings. And then she rose up, and Asriel tells her to bank because another arrow is being sent at. This time with glimmering amethyst power from the king, she is able to bank fast enough to avoid the arrow. And then she and Asriel are both trying to they're pushing at the wings because Rhys told them before they came that they would need to walk in and walk out. That is the only way to get past the wards. So because of that, they have kind of run into the wards and are trying to push through them, but aren't able to do. As they're doing that, blood is spraying from both her shoulder wound and his back because they have so little magic. They're not able to fix it. And they're trying to break through the wards using their power. So that power is then on the wards and not on healing themselves. She's able to unleash a flare of Helion's power, his white light, burning and singeing the wards, able to rip a hole barely wide enough for them. They do make it through. Right as the king is about 30 feet away, completely livid as he beheld the hole that I'd again ripped through his ward, and Tamlin made the most of the distraction. He did not glance towards us as he made a break for the cliff, and then he cleared it, probably on his own spring wind as well, because he can't fly and it's pretty far to jump. But he is able to clear it and then winnow away. And then Farah reaches over, grabs Asriel's hand, and they winnow away as well. His power gives out at the outskirts of their walking. They make it to the edge of the camp, are walking through the camp. Soldiers around notice that Asriel is hurt. They start calling for a healer to come to the spy master's tent. At that point, Rhys hears, he winnows to, and Briar is the name of the other human girl that they have found. Surprisingly, Fair mentions she's not crying. She is just kind of in awe. And then Nezda came around a tent, getting to a halt. And I love this part because she let out a sob at the sight of Elaine still in Asriel's arms. I'd never heard a sound like that from her. She says she isn't hurt. She says into Nezda's mind, and then Nezda breaks into a sprint and actually hugs Farah. Like, she's not sprinting to Elaine, she's sprinting to Farah because Farah saved Elaine. Says thank you to Farah, and then Farah tells Rhys that they need Helion to get the chains off, and then they need to get Asriel to Thesan so that he is able to heal. After the healer patched Farah, she just kind of lays down on the carpet in their tent. And shortly after that, Elaine ends up laying down on the tent floor with her. And then a few moments later, Nesta also lays on the other side of Farah. And then all three of them kind of fall asleep, wrapped up together like they had done when they were in their cottage, when they all shared a bed. Farah does mention that it had been a long time since they've been like that as sisters, and that it was different because now they're all holding each other, whereas in the past they had all been kicking and pushing, trying to get as much. She mentions they held tight and did not let. That is our set of chapters for this episode. My goodness, that was a rough episode. Did we get the Suriel dying in this episode too? Yeah, that was all in this episode. Yeah, I feel like that was a lot of information. We made good time, but good grief.
Yeah, we did.
That was a lot of information. Anything else that we want to touch on or talk?
The emotion.
But you're not wrong. Yeah.
So I was thinking about this when we were talking earlier. Did we ever compare? I feel like we did compare Tamlin's power, or Dorian, to Tamlin with the shifting. Did we do that? I feel like that was one of the theories. Because whenever Feyre was shifting into Ianthe, it just kind of reminded me of when Dorian shifted, whenever he was going. I don't remember where he was going, but I feel like we did touch on this theory before, but
not a whole lot. Not comparing Tamlin and Dorian. We've compared Dorian and his ice magic, which was really just the way he used his raw magic, but no, we have not compared it. And it's funny that you say that because I did see a fan theory the other day that talked about Tamlin's power potentially being handed down or from Dorian, because in book 1 it mentions that, like invisible hands hold Feyre into the chair at one point to make her eat when she first gets to the Spring Court, which we also see invisible hands from Dorian. So I don't know for sure. I mean, obviously we don't know, but I would think it's more along the lines of, I really think that initially, before the High Lords were a thing, that like raw power, like what Dorian has, is what was created, and then the High Lords kind of got pieces of. So almost like if Dorian had a bunch of kids and each child got a piece of his magic, is kind of how I look at it.
Interesting.
I don't know if that's really the case, but that's kind of the sense that I get, because I feel like Feyre's powers, since she has all 7 High Lords' powers combined, that her power is the most like Dorian's because it is all of them. It can manifest as anything. And that's why I mentioned in book 2, when she is hurtling through the air, winnowing through the air to the adder, we talked about the connection that like she can see where the adder's going to be. We talk about in book 2 where she can see where Rhys is going to winnow to, and that's not something that's not a power Rhys has. It's not a power that Lucien has or Tamlin has. So how does she have that power? Is it from another High Lord, or is it the combination of all 7 High Lord powers? Or is it something else that Feyre also has? We don't know, but it just, the way it just sounds like it's different from all the powers except helium. Because that would actually tie in really well with what we just talked about that Helion has.
Because he knew where to find her with the stir.
Yes. Yep, because she could sense where those people were going to be. So that could be Helion's power, because we now know that Helion can sense where she was. And the Lady of the Autumn.
It's nuts.
That is crazy.
That would make a lot of sense.
That makes more sense than thinking she has an additional power that we don't know of. There you go. We just figured it out on her.
Well then.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, like I said, I don't know that any one High Lord has specific powers similar to, I mean, other than Autumn Court has fire, just like Aelin, kind of. Maybe we'll come up with some more theories as we continue to go through the book. And we get into the next books and then the new book. Because I'm sure that'll just open us up to more theories.
We're so close to Crescent City.
Awesome. And that's a wrap for today's episode. These chapters took us on an emotional roller coaster. I can't even remember what we started talking about at this point in our episode. From epic battles and heartbreaking losses to hard-earned victories and some truly unforgettable moments, A Court of Wings and Ruin definitely knows how to leave readers emotionally exhausted in the best. We'd love to hear what you thought about chapters 57 through 65. What moments stood out to you? Which scenes had you cheering, crying, or sitting in complete shock? Come share your thoughts with us. We're always ready to keep the conversation going. We'll see you next time for our next block of chapters. Until then, keep reading, and in the words of our beloved Suriel, leave this world a better place than you found.